And so now I am pleased to join a distinguished panel of experts to talk about how California is leading the way on climate education. So experts?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, President Napolitano, for your presence and for your very inspiring words. I'm so happy that we have the opportunity to gather here in conversation. In the Platonic tradition, the work of education is nurturing that which is good, ethics, that which is true, logic, and that which is beautiful, ethics. So what I'm hoping is that we can think and converse on these three domains: what's good, what's true, and what's beautiful. They are endangered species today. And perhaps we can start with the world of good, the world of ethics, the world of politics. And I will ask our Lieutenant Governor, our President, perhaps our President can wear her former cap as a woman in the world of politics. So why is it so hard? Talk about the political machinery and the political levers that need to be deployed to get us to where we need to be as a civilization. Homo sapiens sapiens has become a geologic force. We're changing the world. So if you could talk a little bit about that, the policy mechanisms. California's at the forefront. How did we get there, for example, Lieutenant Governor?
Well, Marcelo, there's a lot to unpack there. But I think that what you're really asking for is in the Platonic tradition of understanding sort of an ethical basis for policy. We really do, as California, have an answer to that. And the answer is that for decades now in California, ordinary people, have recognized, number one, that our environment is sacred in many ways, that we have to mobilize and activate in order to protect it. And also, frankly, that science is real. Maybe that's getting into the second phase, into the logic side, but I think that it is an ethical value to determine that you're going to adhere to scientific principles. And we have that ethos in the state of California, and frankly, that has translated into legislation. It is translated into very tangible policies that we have in our state that set the standard for the country and for the world. So I think if I were to look at sort of the watershed moments for California's legislation around environmental issues, you really kind of need to start, I think, with AB 32, because that was sort of the moment where there was this sort of popular coalescing around a determination that we are going to use legislation to substantially impact our emissions in this state. It also established the cap and trade program. Fast forward to SB 100 a few years later, which set our 2045 goals. And so if there is an ethos that translates into a policy that is essentially our North Star, it's our 2045 goals. And I think that as I think of all of the educators in the room and up on this panel and helping to build this next generation of children who are activated and aware and educated on environmental issues, the North Star really has to be for them as well, the 2045 goals, and helping us together find that pathway, a pathway that includes investment in innovation around battery storage, that includes innovation in order to ensure that we go from hundreds of thousands to millions of zero-emission vehicles on the road and other elements of transportation. Investment, the kind that President Napolitano oversees at the University of California, in our national laboratories that are doing breakthrough work around carbon capture. So that's, I think, the way that I see it. And again, you asked a Greek to talk about a Platonic approach to looking at these things. So that's, I think, how I would look at it.
You would think this was planned.
No.
President Napolitano.
I think the politics are really tough. And, you know, we're fortunate to live in California, which, as the Lieutenant Governor has said, has been willing to take a leadership role, but it hasn't been mimicked across the country. And it hasn't been mimicked in Washington, D.C. And I think it's because the problem, in a way, seems so vast that it seems, in a way, insolvable. And what we need to do is to break it into component parts: education, research, innovation, investment. And it means creating the right kinds of tax incentives. It means dealing fairly with workers who will be or may be displaced by changing to a carbon neutral future. And so politically, I don't think we can underestimate how difficult and complex these issues are.
Thank you so much. Provost Carter, let's move to the world of
Can I
truth.
comment on that for a moment?
Yes, please.
Actually, so I appreciate both of your perspectives. I just want to add, I recently came from the East Coast, where we used to have a cap and trade model, but it's anyway, that's a separate story. The thing I wanted to say, though, is there are pockets of success and hope, and that it doesn't just have to live in well, it certainly doesn't live in the federal government right now, but it doesn't just have to live in even the state government. It can live in people who are making a difference at the top of a utility. There are visionaries I happen to know very well because I came recently from Princeton University. I was the Dean of Engineering there, but before that I was the founding director of Princeton's Andlinger Center for Energy and the Environment, and I worked very closely with the CEO of the largest utility in New Jersey, Ralph Izzo, who has a really strong passion not only for sustainable energy, but equitable sustainable energy. Because there are issues, for example, that come up, as you said, about tax incentives that benefit the people who can afford to buy electric vehicles. And instead of pouring money into tax incentive, we can get into arguments about that, but tax incentives for electric vehicles, the thing he was promoting, and again, I just think, so we have to think about all the people that can make a difference here, and he was promoting really focusing on energy efficiency and simple things like insulating homes better that make a huge difference in terms of what we were talking about environmental justice, frankly, and energy justice, if you like. And so he's a real leader in that area. Another area, and then you can ask your question, I'm sorry, that is important that hasn't been mentioned yet is how we think about setting up market instruments. And person who is, I think he's still head of New York, it's called NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research and Development Agency. Richard Kaufman, who I also knew well, he came quite a bit to our center. He focused very much, he was working in the Obama administration as a special advisor for the Department of Energy, to how you make it so that those investments are, that people actually win economically from those investments, because you have to have efforts on the governmental side at all levels, but also in the economic sectors, as well as in the education and the national lab sectors. So,
Thank you. Share with us more about your initiative at Princeton, which you founded, teaching the public
Yeah.
about emerging sustainable energy and technologies.
thank you. And I want to start, too, by thanking you for organizing this amazing event. It's really, really important. These are the ways in which, hopefully, we inspire each other, and you know, you've been a huge catalyst for that, so really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Since this is a discussion about education, and one of the things that I felt was extremely important is to educate the public. The public can be children, of course, they're part of the public. And so one of the things I started at Princeton was a public education project we called the Energy Technology Distillates Project, okay? So what is that? And let me unpack that for a second. The idea is, I think it's fantastic. You know, it's very important to be talking about educating young kids all the way through high school, K through 12, about the environment and about climate change. But if we don't also talk about the solutions, if I was still a kid, I guess I'd start to panic. And so I think it's incredibly important that we also build into the curriculum talking about what has to be a portfolio of solutions, both in terms of fossil-free energy, both electricity and fuels, but also, and energy efficiency, but also now at this point, it used to be that's all I talked about, but now it's how do we get the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, okay? And so we need to teach kids about those issues, and every kid should be able to explain scientifically what the greenhouse effect is, because that's what's warming the planet. It's not so hard, even though people in Congress don't seem to want to understand it. And so what this Energy Technology Distillates Project is about, it's all on the web. It's about teaching any interested non-expert about emerging energy technologies. And it's not just geeky stuff. It's written from the point of view of someone that is not an expert. And it's a suite of short articles that if you're only interested in the economics of wind, you can go find out about that. If you're only interested in the policy issues around nuclear energy, you can go read about that. And right now there's 5 of these that exist that essentially look at everything from teaching you about the technology, but then knowing that maybe the technology is something which has a bunch of lingo in it that you don't understand. And so we always include a short article that teaches you the lingo, teaches you the key concepts that you need to understand how a battery works. So the very first one, because we thought very much about the fact that even though we know how to do solar and wind electricity, those are intermittent forms of electricity, we have to find ways to store it. And so the very first distillate we did was on how battery storage could or could not, what would it take to be able to actually make the electricity grid work fully on renewables, okay? So you could, if you want to teach about the concepts of batteries, you want to teach about what the technologies are, you want to teach about the economics of it, the climate impact, the policy, all the different issues, we unpack those in short articles. So that's something we did at Princeton. It's available on the web for nuclear energy, for batteries, for solar, for wind, for fusion energy, actually. And that's what's up there right now. The other thing that I wanted to mention that I had no part of, except I'm a huge fan of it, you heard earlier from Marcia McNutt, the president of the National Academy of Sciences. Prior to Marcia was an atmospheric scientist by the name of Ralph Cicerone. He was, in fact, a UC, both chancellor and a professor at UC Irvine. I knew him. Lovely human being. Unfortunately, he passed away in the last year or two. He was passionate about the following issue. A lot of the the issues with respect to educating the public about and getting people to really understand that we're in a climate emergency beyond the coasts, okay, is what people try to do is to sow doubt in how do we actually know that this is true? How do we actually know that the Earth is warming? And that sowing that doubt and uncertainty, the way they do it, or they have done it a lot, is by saying, oh, those are just climate models. They're just models. They're just a theory. Ralph, may he rest in peace, went and gathered, not by himself, but with the imprimatur of the National Academy of Sciences, the measurements. So there is and so no one can say that this is just a theory. There is experimental measurements showing, and uncontrovertible measurements showing CO2 rise, showing global warming, okay, and all of the impacts associated with it. And so what I would urge you to do is if you go to the National Academy's website, you can type in the words, and actually if you go to the website of the Center at Princeton, I put it on there too. There are videos. They're called Lines of Evidence. That's what it's called, Lines of Evidence. Put it into Google, put it in National Academies of Science. I assume it's still up on the web. They're beautiful short videos that just very quickly teach to anyone about the true lines of evidence showing unequivocally that fossil fuel burning is increasing CO2 emissions and is leading to the warming of the Earth and all of the things that go with that, sea level rise and heavier storms and droughts and all of this other stuff. So I would urge you to look at least those two as a means of education.
Thank you. Here is the truth. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Provost Del Casino, let's turn to beauty now. At the CSU,
Excellent beauty. All right.
at the CSUs, you have been doing extraordinary work, really beautiful work. I think jointly, our two systems train over half of all teachers in the state of California. Talk a little bit about what the urgency, the president spoke about. This seems as a vast, insurmountable challenge moving forward. Talk about what you're already doing and how we can accelerate, take it to the next level of excellence and of relevance and of engagement.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I've sat through the last 2 days. I had a lot of notes getting ready to go. And then you all mucked me up with so many comments that I'm just going to put it down. But the truth is, as I started to think about this panel and this set of questions, and reflecting back on my beginning time in the system, I was an elementary school teacher before I came back to the system and started working in the College of Education at Long Beach State. We built an integrated teacher education program and a multi-subjects program that I think is totally adaptable to the wicked problems of the day, of which climate change is one of the major wicked problems we have. And I think the way to think about this, and obviously we have to get the science across, we have got to engage students in that set of literacies, but there's a series of other literacies as well that I don't want us to leave on the sidelines as we do this, and I think these integrated programs do a pretty good job of this. What I mean by that is if you think about the kind of core geographic and historical literacies to understand anthropogenic change in general, I mean the collapse of the Indus River Valley 5,000 years ago was subject of result of environmental change, probably overuse by humans who eventually had to migrate out. It's a local case of what we're seeing on a global scale. But there's ways in which, as I think about it, having lived in Arizona for 8 years, by the way, we really missed you. I just had to say that, and I'm never going to get a chance to say that again. Plus, I learned the Easter Bunny isn't real today. So it's been a traumatic day for me. So you missed that. That was earlier. It was earlier. You weren't here. Marcia McNutt, thank you very much. National Academy of Sciences, blowing it on the Easter Bunny. All right, sorry, I got derailed for a second. But if you think about I'm a fan of the kind of instilling these questions throughout multiple places, such that over time the concepts themselves bubble up. It's the organic work of people in teacher education programs. As we sat as a table and talked about the struggles and obstacles we have to scale, I stepped back and I said, well, but what are we already doing? Well, look at all the people in this room, right? And where are all the activities that are happening? And I think what's exciting about teacher education, the role of the CSU, the partnership with the UC, the scale at which we already do the training, is we have to hit this problem just about everywhere. It needs to show up in math. It needs to show up in the history, social science experience. It needs to show up in writing. And I think if we do that effectively, it's not the only wicked problem we could take on. I think we could take on the question of digital literacy and privacy. I think we could take on the future of work and labor as we automate. All of these things could be picked up. And I think if we shift the conversation of just there's a science around this that we have to teach to there's an object called climate change that we need to embed across our curriculum, I think we're already capable of doing that because of the way in which the CSU has made itself available to that with its curriculum, but also through its partnerships with the UC. So I think there's a lot of possibility, and I walk already with a lot of positive energy around what is possible and what is already happening within that.
Thank you so much. Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis, last night we had an extraordinary presentation by Lorenzo Fioramonti. He's the Italian Minister of Education. And it was extremely inspiring. Every kid in Italy will have to study climate change, the climate crisis, above all, as the Provost suggested, solutions moving forward. And obviously, one of his challenges, as he articulated, was sort of the alliances that are required. In this room, you have extraordinary teachers and students and advocates. How can our citizens, the citizens of the state of California, best work collaboratively with the government so that every teacher can do what they want to do?
So I unfortunately wasn't here. I would have loved to have heard his presentation. So I can't necessarily compare what they're doing in Italy to what they're doing in California, what we're doing here. But I will say that I think what I was seeing and looking at the agenda of the entire day is how much we are doing, starting with Fran Pavley's bill back in 2003 that really kind of got the ball going and rolling and saying we are going to institute into our curriculum, into our K-12, education about the environment. And that has set off a cascade of additional bills and additional actions by the state government, and through the Department of Education and all the way up into public higher education to be able to do this. And I think I heard Ben Allen was coming today. Is that right? So you've heard, this is going on, and we are continuing at a conference like this as well. What are we missing? Where are the gaps? How do we continue to find ways to ensure that every one of our children throughout the curriculum, throughout their time from kindergarten or pre-kindergarten all the way up, certainly through high school graduation and beyond, have the environmental issues, particularly around climate change, integrated into their education. But something else was said earlier that I'd just like to note, and that is that if you raise with children the issue that there is a problem, you also have to talk about solutions. And I think that just as we're raising the fact that there is a problem in our schools, students, kids, and their parents and their families are also recognizing that we are in California already coping with the realities of climate change, right? There's acting in order to combat climate change, and then there is coping with the effects of climate change. If any of you have been evacuated from your homes because of these torrential wildfires that have hit our state now over the last certainly the most intense ones in the last decade. But what we are seeing in our state with these wildfires is unlike anything we've ever seen before. I've had a chance to talk to a lot of firefighters, and they are believers. Whatever their politics are, they are believers that they are coping with the impacts of climate change, because they talk about things like fire tornadoes. You know, these conditions now where our forests are experiencing massive die-offs as a result of the pine bark beetle infestations, which are also driven by the fact that the winters aren't as cold as they had been, which is leaving all of this debris in our forests. And then suddenly, you know, fires start all the time in California. At one 10-day period, I think CAL FIRE had put out over 2,000 fires. The difference is that when you have Santa Ana type winds that we've had in California for many years, you have that caliber of wind all over the state now. You have the ingredients of devastating wildfires that last year alone, you know, burned down Paradise and took the lives of 85 people. So we are every day across government in Sacramento, you know, finding new ways to buy more equipment, to deploy into areas where we can now look at new technology of predicting winds to be able to get the equipment there in advance, knowing that these are areas that are most susceptible. So I think that there is an education that is being hard learned by our children through the coping of the effects of climate change through these fires. So again, I think in our international engagement and looking for other ways that we can collaborate with countries around the world, whether it's through education, whether it's through our subnational commitment to the Under 2 Coalition, which many of you may know about, there is a lot that we can do. And notwithstanding Secretary Napolitano's recognition that this is a hard problem and it's going to be hard to drive forward to solutions, there are partners out there, and California will continue to lead the way.
Thank you so much. Thank you. President Napolitano, it's a vast problem you've suggested. What are the top 2 or 3 priorities, politically speaking, that we should endeavor to undertake to move the needle in the political realm?
You know, I think, well, first of all, nothing succeeds like success. And so shining a brighter light on things that are already going on, that are having an impact, from the website, the information that Emily described, to the curricula reform that we've had in California, to concrete steps that cities and universities have already taken to show that people are coming together. They can do things that will make a difference, and then trying to then the political question is how to scale, how to extend, how to get others. If LA is doing this and it's great, well, why don't we do it in Phoenix? Why don't we do it in Las Vegas? You know, why don't we do it in other communities around the country? So I think that's one way to address this from a political standpoint. A second way, I think, is we need to be consistent and persistent and intentional about continuing to raise not just the risks that we are confronting, but also what we need to mobilize to do, what some have already mobilized to accomplish. But we shouldn't let the I'll call them the deniers, own the media landscape. We need to own the media landscape here. And then the third thing is we need to make sure that when people are running for office, that they are continually challenged to say, what are your ideas for how we deal with climate change? What will you do if you're a mayor, if you're a governor, if you're a senator, et cetera? And so, and making that as frequently asked a question as Medicare for All is. So,
Thank you.
there you go.
Thank you. Provost?
Yeah, and, this is a really important conversation because I do think we need to look at local examples and their scalability and so forth. Of course, the complexity of climate change is it's going to be 7.5 degrees at the pole, and it's going to shift the monsoon that comes up and rains in Arizona. And so there's going to be a differential set of questions. And I think to the point of mitigation and resiliency are critical, but what are going to be the adaptation strategies? And I think of younger children, having taught all the way from first grade up, you sit in a room with 6-year-olds and go, hey, we got a problem. You'd be amazed how good they are, right, at coming up with kinds of ways of thinking, like maybe single-family homes are not the future of real estate, right? Maybe megacities are the future of real estate, and we all have to go up and take as little land as possible. And you can actually throw a problem like that in front of a 6-year-old and go, here's a map, and start to think about those geographies. I think it intersects as well that what I'm suggesting is that the environmental literacies that we're talking about intersect with a whole series of other literacies. And I would argue that even the quantitative reasoning debate that's going on right now and what we think that needs to happen within the context of the state intersects with the environmental literacy question. Because if you don't have that skill, how are you going to kind of work the math on the other end around the environmental problem? Or if you don't have the creative literacy skill, how are you going to tell that story in a way that's effective? To the point of the historical and geographical literacy. All of those things intersect, and that's where we're going to get change. Demonstrable change is when people can pull these levers and work interdisciplinarily in teams, each one of them bringing some expertise. So I think that's the educational system we want to build, and that's the training we can put. Because even the classroom, the individual classroom, and the idea of individual learning, it's an antiquated way of thinking. And I think it's time to transform that and bring team thinking together in collaboration. It's what business wants. It'll affect how we think about all of this.
Can I
Please,
jump in?
please.
So I agree with that. I do want to have a little bit of a different twist on it, because I think you're absolutely right. In fact, I say this all the time, which is that the problems we face, whether it's climate change or pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere or the future of work, all these different problems that we face, they are so difficult, and you said they're wicked problems. That's a term.
It's a New England term.
It doesn't mean wicked in the usual sense of wicked, which is why I don't like it. But anyway, the point is that all those problems are so complex and so thorny that they do require expertise from a variety of different perspectives. It's a beautiful form of diversity, by the way. So it's different perspectives and different expertise to bring together to solve pieces of it. So that, in fact, and that's certainly true in the energy landscape, in the sustainability landscape. You need people from all sorts of different backgrounds to come and solve these problems. That said, in education, while I think it is important to teach in a way that gives a broad perspective, if all you learn is breadth and you're not an expert in something, that doesn't help us. We will not solve problems without deep expertise so we have to teach both. We have to teach deep expertise in a subject so that somebody can stand up and say, I'm an expert in wind turbines or whatever, okay? But at the same time, what you'd like to do is to pull back and give students the opportunity to have that broader perspective across something like climate change, or something like the future of work, or artificial intelligence, or what have you, so that you have opportunities for the students to step back and work with others to get different perspectives. You need both.
Something funny happens on the way to interdisciplinary, and it's called disciplinary. You
Right.
can't get to interdisciplinary without achieving the fundamental mastery of what built the disciplines. One of the most beautiful and really moving things we heard from youth all over the world, over 150 different countries, in every language known through the ethnographic record, is really a clamor for science. This is truly beautiful and unique. Climate change, climate disruptions, climate solutions are really a very powerful point of entry into the curiosity that is at the heart of all scientific endeavors. Newton has a beautiful line that he wrote towards the end of his life, and that is, you know, he sees himself as a child in front of the seashore, looking at the beautiful conches and shells and imagining what worlds they hide. The climate and climate change is a point of entry into the curiosity and into the scientific method. Moreover, it fundamentally is a point of entry into the ethic of care, into the world of ethics. There is an intuitive sense, and you read this through the reports of the youth movement, that it's not right, it's not ethical that the top billion on Earth today are generating most of the pollution, and the bottom 4 billion are really paying the price, paying the cost in terms of health, in terms of so many other factors. So it is fundamentally a point of entry into science, it's a point of entry into ethics, it is a point of entry into agency. Again, President Napolitano said, well, the problems are vast. So the problems are vast. What's beautiful in these student marches is the sense of agency, the sense of it's our redwood forest. We have a little redwood forest here at the lab school. It's our forest. It's our little creek. So I wonder if you could reflect about the opportunities that come when you have this alignment of a clamor for science, for ethics, and for agency in our youth. And what should a great university like the University of California, Los Angeles, numero uno ranked public research university, be in the business of doing?
Well, I think it's okay. So of course I'm going to give you a biased perspective because everybody's perspective, I guess, is biased. So I'm trained as a scientist, but for the last 15 years, my hat has been, or my label has been, an engineer. I was in the engineering school at Princeton until I came back here, and I'm actually have a faculty position in engineering here. And the reason I bring up engineering is because I want people to know that, I mean, part of the reason I moved from being a scientist to an engineer was precisely because of what you just said. Because I think of engineering as science in service of society. And in particular, engineers have a sense, too, of the importance of ethics. It's part of their certification, okay? So I think engineering is this beautiful, we need to educate more engineers. Okay, now that sounds self-serving, but it's not. It's really what the planet needs. Because engineers are coming with the scientific background, with the sense of ethics. That's not to say we're all human. There's a distribution, so I'm sure there's unethical engineers, just like there are unethical human beings everywhere. But there is built into the educational system a sense of ethics, a sense of the importance of solving problems. And I think that something that hasn't happened enough in the United States, frankly, and if you look at other countries, we are very behind in training more engineers to help solve our problems. I mean, not that of course, it's fine to also import great people from abroad, but we should be doing our part to offer those kinds of opportunities for our children who grow up here to be a real part of the agency of solving those problems. And just to come back for 1 second to how vast the problem is, that's why it's so important to recognize, as President Napolitano said, that it can be broken down into bits. You have to break it down. And there are so many different ways in which the people can contribute from policy to economics to the science to all, to ways in which, to sociology, to all sorts of different ways that can make a big difference and can work on different pieces of it. And I do believe, I have great optimism that if we are intentional and if we just decide that we're not going to let anyone stop us, that if we all work on pieces of it, we will get there.
Thank you so much. Kronos devours its children. This is a Velázquez
It's counting
or a Goya. I can't remember. It's in the Prado, one of the most gorgeous paintings ever. Thank you so much. Dear colleagues, I give you what is good, what is beautiful, what is true. Thank you.